Cool. Thank you. All right. Let's see if we can get this thing up and going. Yes. No password. Cool. All right, make it blend. Bring VFX techniques into the browser. Hopefully I've got some decent things to say about this. First, I'll start about myself, though. I run a company called Oblio. It's a company that I started in 2015. Prior to that, I had a company called The Flock that I started in 2010. And we do just about only movie campaigns. Occasionally, we might do something for a sport brand or something like that, but almost primarily movie campaigns. We started as a Flash shop before it died. And then we moved into HTML, and then we moved into WebGL, which is what I'm really focusing on here. And now we're moving very heavily into 360 video. So, that's sort of our thing, is experiences. And I haven't done a project in the last year that hasn't had a ton of 3D work involved. Okay. So why should we look at the VFX industry when we're talking about WebGL, which is like a real-time thing? It makes more sense to look at the games industry to see the sort of stuff that they're doing from a tech standpoint, or even just look at other websites that are using this. And I just feel like I see other people that are using WebGL, and they have a particular mindset very often where they're just using the frameworks how they're meant to be. This framework can load a model, so I load a model in it, and it has these lights, so I guess that's how I light it. Or if they want to do something fancier, they go all the way and they're reading white papers and they're trying to write crazy particle systems for moving millions of particles and basically doing it for real. And what I think that's cool about the film industry is that it's all fake. Like, yes, they have these crazy renderers and they can render some fantastic stuff, but quite honestly, half the time if they need to light up somebody's face, they just do a junk mask around the face with a quick levels adjustment and animate that up. And so they're really good at faking it. And that's something that I really like about the VFX industry. So kind of the intention is to talk about some things that they do in the VFX industry to work with specifically photographic assets and how we can make our WebGL blend, because they're really good at blending CG assets with these photographic plates they have. So the main thing I'm going to focus on is this first note, which is just a basic workflow for compositing, a set of things that I think any good composited image is going to have in it. And then I'm going to move on to a few FX tricks that we can do in the browser. That one's just kind of like going back through a few of my projects and showing some things that I thought were cool. And tech is just roughly talking about some things that I think can be integrated in a WebGL pipeline. So compositing is the art of blending, right? People use all these different layers. I should mention that I threw this together pretty fast, this deck, and I wanted to have a few more assets to show, particularly VFX reels, because there's incredible reels out there where you can see people's layers where they just break down these shots from all kinds of movies, and you see how they chop together a mountain and a river, and then they add smoke and all this stuff, and you're like, by the time it's done, it looks real, but you can watch these videos and see them break it down and see everything. And there's a million of them, so you just Google VFX breakdowns, and you'll see some really awesome stuff. In this section, I'm going to talk a lot about this project I did for Fantastic Beasts. So this is just a quick overview video. Let's see what it is. It was done in conjunction with Google for Warner Brothers, and it's a series of 360 scenes around New York where we inserted real-time animated characters. So they gave us these equirectangular 360 scenes, and we had to kind of do our thing with them. And it was a pretty fast thing. All of these owls are WebGL, papers, all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of masking involved. There's like light rays that are added in WebGL, so it's hard to see what they're actually animating subtly. Yeah, and this is one of our heaviest animated scenes with just tons of different paper models going. So that was a real challenge, and I'll talk about that a little bit of the tech aspect of how we got fully rigged models in, and we're able to animate them like you would a real animation as opposed to just tweens. Okay, how do you start? In any good composite, you got to start with your base layer. And so for the sake of this points, I'm going to assume that in our project we're given a photographic scene of some sort, and we're trying to add WebGL into that scene. So our base layer is going to be that photograph that's delivered to us. And, you know, there's flat layers. This is kind of traditional, you know, a backdrop of a set. So you think of it as you're filming. Your WebGL is the stuff in the foreground, and the photographic asset is just a flat plane in the background. Like, nothing too fancy there. I think that's a pretty obvious way to approach it. Interesting, this is a young James Cameron, which I didn't know he was a matte painter, but apparently before he was James Cameron, he was a matte painter on Escape from New York. And here he is painting a glass matte. So they would paint on the glass and then shoot through it where the actual footage would be behind the glass. So that city above we just saw him painting is actually in front of everything. That's pretty cool. And we can actually use some of that in WebGL as well. If we wanted to have a character moving behind a pillar or something like that, we could easily cut a pillar plane, throw that in front. But I think a more modern technique is projection mapping, which is one that I utilize a lot. I should have written down whose reel this is from, but I found this from a reel online that really shows projection mapping well. Looks like a final plate, but as soon as he pulls out into 3D, you can see that that camera has been projecting out the image onto geometry. So that's what projection mapping is. You basically make low-res, low-poly geometry, and you project an image onto it, hence the name. And it's a great way to spatially sort of take what was a flat image and give yourself some actual space to work with. So we used that heavily for this Fantastic Beasts project. This particular scene here, this is me just kind of moving around my scene. They didn't have a 360 photo for us. They had just a series of about maybe 13 or 14 set photos taken inside of this apartment set. And so literally we just worked backwards. We looked at it and we said, okay, I think that camera looks like it's probably 5 feet off the ground. So I put a camera there. That wall looks like it's 12 feet wide. Okay, so I started with a box, and I projected in the back corner and kind of nudged my camera around until it looked half decent. Pulled the box out and slowly like brought in more images and projected them around. And you can see, if you don't look at it from our correct angle, it looks crazy. It's super stretched, but allowed us to patch together a full 360. And with these projections, you can, on a good one, you can fly your camera around, you can do simple parallaxing, or you can take it as far as basically turning it into a full 3D set. So once you have your base layer, I'm not going to talk about the modeling and the texturing. Let's just assume you also now have the thing that you want to insert in. You got to match your lighting to the scene that you're putting them into. So I thought a fun little thing that we could do here is analyze the lighting of some images and kind of talk about where the light is coming from. So, ugly cry face, poor Dawson. I think I have a laser pointer somewhere in here, or I'll just use my mouse. I'll use my mouse. Okay, so very obviously we have light coming from his left, our right. That is a direct sunlight. So it's pretty much a directional light if you're thinking in standard 3D light terms. But we also have a very strong ambient light that's lighting up the other side of him. He's not in shadow. And if you pay attention, you'll see that down here along his shoulder, along the back, he also has a rim light. So a rim light is generally behind, very often shined up, very bright, hopefully lighting up hairs and just helping give the person a silhouette. So I think that if I were to be building lighting for this shot, one strong directional light, general ambient light, and a possible rim light. Another pretty cool pick. This one has very obviously two lights. They're really strong. It's really easy to see what they are. But you have this one in the back, and it's giving you this massive rim light on his head. It's hitting up this guy's face. It's lighting up the hair back here. And then one more nice and low light to the front that is lighting up this other side of their face. This one, once again, pretty easy to see how many lights there are because they all have a different color. We've got a red light on our left. We've got a blue light on our right, and then there's a neutral color in the front. But I think the thing that's interesting about this image that we can really pull apart from it is trying to figure out what angle those lights are at. So one thing that can help with that is actually looking at any sort of rounded geometry. So her shoulder right here, you can see the hot spot, which makes me know that that light is back there. And also, the light is not wrapping around her shoulder, so we know that the light is back behind. Otherwise, it would be lighting up the side of her shoulder. So it's a red light. It's kind of behind. It's kind of like the rim light, like I was saying for the Dawson photo, but a little bit further forward so that it lights the side a little too. The blue light, very similar sort of light. We can see it hitting there, but it's not too high or too low. We can see from the shadows and the way it's reflecting off. We can see it in her eye here. So any sort of eye, it's always a great way to figure out what the lighting is because you can generally see the reflection directly in the eye of the lights. And with her, we can see both that blue light right there and we can see this highlight in her eye to let us know that the neutral light is a little bit to our left and high up. And we can also, the other big clue here is the shadows. Underneath her nose, the shadow underneath her chin. It really lets us know where that light's coming from. This one seemingly is complex. There's like a million lights in this scene. But if we just look at Winona Ryder, we don't look at the rest of it, I mean, I get kind of two lights. I kind of see, should I switch to this other mic for the popping? Yeah. Okay. So, are we back on? Yeah, okay. So I get pretty much this light on her side, and other than that, there's this second light that's hitting her on the forehead and shoulder, and it's kind of like she's looking at that light, really, which is a little dark on the screen, but yeah, she's looking right up here, and it's very obvious that it's pretty high above her. It's not too far in front of her because it's not lighting her shoulder in front, but it's up there, and then probably some big light just off the screen to our right is actually lighting this all up. And they kept it pretty dim so that it would look like the lights were lighting here. But once again, if I was inserting a light in the scene, I probably would ignore the string lights altogether and actually just make a couple simple lights that replicate the lighting on her. And if you ever have the chance, you're doing something like this and you're able to get on the set or wherever the original photography is, the ideal thing would actually be to take a neutral gray or a white ball and place that in your scene and shoot it, and you'd be able to see exactly the lighting on that light ball. So this is the last one, I swear. This one is really kind of complex. Studio lighting gets crazy. I haven't even figured out all the lights in this, but I just wanted to talk through some of the clues that we can see. So we've got this light, this shadow right here underneath, and that's very obvious that there is a light to out here, out pretty directly over. And this other shadow that pipe, I guess, is casting lets us know that there's a light way up high. So, I mean, there's a lot of things in this that let us know it's a big shiny car. The other place that I really like to look, though, is down here. We can see the reflection of a light there and a reflection of a light here letting us know exactly where that other light over here is as well. So, and then we have a shadow here to the side. So I think that there's probably three main light sources in this. This one that's reflecting on here is, I think, closer to us and somewhat up high. I think there's one that is probably right around this hot spot, but to the back that is hitting here, shining forward towards the car. And we've got another one probably in front of the car off to the left of the screen. So, yeah, anyways, if any sort of compositing, as much as you can do to get that lighting right, totally spend the time, take it into 3D, mess with it, get it right. And then, once you have that lighting, you could go the route of actually using, so say we're using 3JS, you could drop in the lights in the scene and just try to light it. I personally am a big fan of trying to bake my lighting. With lighting, you aren't in the real time going to get great global illumination, which is those light balances that really light all the lower areas. And so I like to try to get a more complex light scheme than I can pull off real time by using some baking techniques. So the first one's super simple. For a game we just did for Facebook called Backclimb. If you guys, any of you are in Messenger, it's an endless runner that we launched for Lego Batman in January. And we baked the lighting completely into these people. So if you were to look at their original textures, Robin is just going to be a flat red and all really flat colors. But if you actually look at the texture for Batgirl, you can see that they have all of these gradations, all of these shadows. We just baked it all in. So when we came into the browser, we didn't have to light them at all. They just looked pretty decent. It's not exactly accurate, but pretty decent. And it saved us a lot of dev time to not have to build that in. And it also allowed us to use some really good tools, because there's amazing tools for baking light out there. This is also baked light, and this is baked in V-Ray. That link down there is to Sketchfab for this, so you can actually open that up and spin all around and see it. But yeah, they built this scene, they took it into V-Ray, and it was able to bake out all the lighting into their texture maps. So it's beyond the scope of this talk to talk about what that baked light turns into as a texture and how to get it in. But I think with a little research you can figure that out. But showing you the results you can get, you can get some really great lighting by baking your lights. So that's direct baking. The next thing that's pretty interesting, I took this from, if you guys know the Spite, he's got this awesome tutorial on matte caps. Matte caps are used in ZBrush, and they basically are these images of spheres that represent basically 180 degrees of lighting. If you look at that sphere, we can see all the light that's hitting it. Kind of also represents surface quality as well, not just lighting. But we can see where all the lights are hitting it. And so we've got a real-time demo here of how this actually works. So you can see that basically that sphere in the bottom right corner is what is completely lighting this guy. And it looks really great, and it's just an image. And if we swap that image, he now looks like completely different lighting, completely different material. And it's cool because literally it's just all being driven from that little image right there. So I've used that for a few projects. You can paint them yourself in Photoshop if you want to mess with the lighting, because it's not technical, really. What happens is, from a slightly technical standpoint, it looks at the surface, figures out what direction that surface is facing, and then it goes to the image and looks up the pixel that would represent that same angle on the sphere. And you can pull off any variety of materials. We've got shiny, we've got matte, we've got sort of almost a subsurfacey skin sort of look. And yeah, so it's a really cool technique, but it has its limitations. It only works, as I said before, basically in 180. No matter where you're looking at this model, the lighting is going to be exactly the same. So if I'm looking at it here and then in my camera I were to spin around and look the other direction, the light would still look like if it was coming from the right when I was looking this way. As soon as I look that way, it's still coming from the right, which is now the opposite direction because I turned around. So it's not correct, but it's pretty good and pretty elaborate and also low tech. The shader for this, so I actually have, this is just an iframe showing the Spite's demo. If you just Google, I think just 3JS spherical mapping or something like that, you'll get the same demo. And he actually has a source code and everything. It's super awesome, really useful. I recommend it. But if you need 360 and you want to bake your lighting, you can also, basically instead of baking a matte cap, you can bake a full echo-rectangular image. So this is specifically an image that I used in the Fantastic Beasts project. This one lights it from all 360. Basically imagine a cylinder, unwrap that cylinder, stretch it out, or it's a little more than that, but wrap a cylinder around a sphere, and that's basically what it is. And the way that I generated these for mine is I lit everything in Cinema. I used GI, I used all the fancy rendering, and I just put a sphere right where I wanted to capture the lighting, a white sphere, and you can bake different texture passes inside of Cinema, and you can bake illumination pass. So I UV wrapped that sphere, basically equirectangular, baked out the texture. It's like, bam, now I have a lighting capture of what that scene is in that spot. And if you want to get really fancy, you can even set up those spheres in multiple places in a scene, and as your character or whatever your model is moves between the scene around it, you can interpolate between the multiple images and have the lighting actually change as though it was dynamically lit, but it's not. And that's used a lot in video games. So as much as I say VFX is awesome, there's amazing technical stuff that's done in video games, so that's the next place I go. I just like to look for VFX as the initial inspiration. And then generally I look at video games for the actual execution. So next thing in the compositing, you got to match the focus. You can see that he's a little blurry in there, strolling Leo. I don't know why they're running though, because he's in a good mood. Yeah, you got to add a little blur to that guy. Otherwise, it's not going to fit in there. And I had to do that on Fantastic Beasts as well. So I have a couple images here. If you look at these plates, you can see the lines are just way too crisp. It doesn't work with that chair that's a little blurry in front of it. Same with these books. It's a little hard to tell in this scenario. But for sure, yeah, it's a little crisp. And in this next shot, we can see that this is what it looks like in the actual site. You don't notice that it looks blurry in the site. It's just it, but it is. I blurred it 2 pixels, something relatively small, which I think I should talk about very briefly about multipass rendering. It's not something that I feel like, it's not something that's like directly in the box in something like Three.js. You can't just very easily be like, oh, I'm going to blur just this layer and not the whole scene. It's generally thought of as a post-process on everything. So a lot of this stuff, I like to render all of my stuff separately. So I rendered the plates and the books and all of that to one render target with alpha, do my blurs on there, then I composite it back on top of the image. And I think on any of these scenes in Fantastic Beasts, I had about 3 or 4 different render layers. I have some foreground, some background. I have some optional layers for things like smoke and stuff. So then after you get your lighting and your focus, generally you might get pretty close with your coloring by your lights, but if you're working with something that is already a heavily filtered image, it's not going to have a straight linear color response, because they may have done curves on it, they could have done all kinds of things. It could look like it had an Instagram filter on it. You're never going to get that with regular lighting. So fortunately, there is a very great technique for being able to do elaborate coloring in WebGL, and it's called LUTs. So I was going to do a LUT demo. I ran out of time. But I did it in Photoshop, and it actually is the exact same process. So our little strolling Leo, he doesn't match the scene at all. But throw some color layers on him. This is like 5 minutes, so he matches the scene okay. But like, that was quick. I did it in the lobby. But the fact of the matter is, I could do that once I figured out what my actual curves are directly in the browser with what is called a LUT. And I should say that I stole this LUT from Matt Deslauriers or something. I don't know how to pronounce it. But he's here. He's speaking Wednesday, I believe. And he has a nice LUT demo online. So I actually grabbed his LUT demo very quickly to be able to show this off. So what a LUT does, though, in a nutshell, is on the left we have a color table. It's straight up color. It represents most of the colors in the spectrum. It's obviously it's not going to be all of them, but a lot of them. And you can take it, do all your Photoshop work that you want for all of your coloring, etc., and bake out a modified version of the color table. So that's what this modified one is. And that's the color change that I did to Leo in that image. So it can take you fully from here, if we apply it to just Leo, to that. It's very quick. And he also has a demo where he shows the famous Lena, and clicking switches which color table is being used on the right. So one thing that I really like about this process as well is that it separates some of the technical coloring aspects from necessarily the technical implementation. So if you're an art director out there and you don't like the coloring you're getting, you can ask your developer to put in some LUT tables. You can get the image into Photoshop, do all your work. You can't do blurs and things like that in a LUT. It only will take one pixel color and change it to another pixel color. But you could bake in curves, color balance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You could do some heavy coloring work like you would want to do in your composite. Just give back out the final LUT to your developer. Done. Okay, I'm going to try to speed it up because apparently I'm burning through this time and I had a lot of stuff I wanted to talk through. So additional layers, that will sell it. There's a lot of things that could be additional layers. In this one, there is rain. She has like color that matches a bunch of stuff. And it really ties her to the scene that the rain layers are going over top of her and all of that. So I think, and if you look at any of these compositing reels, you'll see tons of post layers of fog and all of these things that really just blend everything together. And final, oh, this is going to show in Fantastic Beasts. I wanted you to see that my startup disk was almost full. No, that's how I did my light race in Fantastic Beasts. They're just literally planes around my camera. Super, super simple. And I just have a basic texture on it. And so that's one of my favorite sort of layering techniques or something like that. You can do the same with fog. A lot of times I'll use a depth if I know where it's from the camera to do fog. I had a huge list of things that I would have wanted to show you, but I didn't have time to get those examples, and it looks like I wouldn't have time to show them anyways. Overall treatment, final coloring, that can really tie it. You know, you get a final scene, you do the equivalent of a Photoshop photo filter or something on top to really just solidify your final scene, or even like a final blur or tilt shift. Lens blurs, you know, those can be really cheesy for like a flare, but if it's got a nice dirt on your lens, that can do a lot. And let's just see if I can get through anything in here. I was going to show off the Now You See Me 2 site. You should check it out. I'll just scroll through it real fast so we can see a few like effecty FX type tricks that we did in here. I should say that the fabulous Shane Mielke, if you guys know who he is, he was my main developer on this project. So we gave him a lot of the assets, a lot of the animations, storyboards, etc. But he took a lot of that stuff and really threw it together. And this is basically meant to sort of, in a similar way to the movie, extend, maybe sort of like an interactive magic show. This is using displacement in front to show a refraction technique. This actual animation, though, for the most part, is literally just slides, images that are just sliding between each other. It looks really, really fancy, but it's about 6 images that are just intercutting, and they're sliding. Image projection. Yes, we had a photo of Jesse Eisenberg, and we just had a quick model made that was close enough to his body. Not really good if you spin this camera at all, but it allowed us to really have some of that depth where we can get close to his hand. And also displacement, something I haven't had a chance to talk about fully. It's what I'm doing for these raindrops. So I believe, let's see if I can finish getting through this scene real fast. There's one last thing I wanted to show in here. It's a stairwell? No, it's an eye. Magic Shop. And then multipass rendering. You can do some shit like that. Composite it directly into a mask. Yeah, I think that we may be wrapping it. That was the main stuff that I had prepared. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do, but definitely think outside of the box of what's just directly built into 3JS. And without getting super technical, think about the ways that you can fake it. Think about the stuff that you would have done in Flash, if you guys ever used Flash. But it was great because we did all kinds of hacky stuff in it. So, yeah, I think, are we moving on to Q&A? Is that the, all right. Anyone have questions out there? Anything you, yeah?
You said at the end that you kind of just do an overall like lens flare or effects. Is that sort of tie everything together as one?
Yeah, exactly. So In the end, yes. In the end, sometimes we do an overall blending effect. So, yeah, I like to do that. I don't have a great example to show right now, unfortunately, but I've done quite a few sites where I'll do something like a tilt shift or something like that that just meshes everything in. It's also something like a tilt shift's great because you can make it responsive to your mouse as it moves around. It can add another interaction layer. But generally, I mean, definitely noise layers can do a huge amount to pull things together. I think that I actually do have, let's see, this Insidious project that I did a couple years ago. I think, let's see, maybe, this is a little bit hacky, my little presentation deck that I put together. Tech stuff though, that pipeline. Oh yeah, so I wanted to show this just because this is a good example of like, this actually has a LUT on it, real time in the browser, and it has a grain, noise, camera, dirt, it has a bunch of stuff, and it makes the whole thing kind of feel like you're actually in a thing, like somewhat. I mean, let's be honest, it's just, it looks pretty CG, but you know, that really helped. Those layers at the end really took it from looking terrible to looking decent. Any other questions? Yeah.
So if you're in the situation where you're a filmmaker and you're hoping to have something like this for a project,
Yeah.
who's the first person you should hire to do this?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I would say that all of this 360, 3D stuff is extremely time intensive, takes a lot of time, and generally takes a large team. So I think without a budget behind the project, it could be hard to take it to someone. I think if you had someone that really was looking to themselves build their portfolio and they had the skills, you might be able to work that out. But otherwise, I mean, there's a bunch of studios that I think are amazing. You know, Unit 9, North Kingdom, Oblio. I would go to one of those experience-based vendors. But it can be really hard to just go to a one-off developer or something to build this stuff because really, the more I get into this, the more that I'm dealing with like large teams, 15 people, where, you know, I have, right now I'm finishing up a 360 for King Arthur that I hope is launching this week. And it, I think I had 6 animators for a month and a half, 2 months going, or I 2 animators for 2 months. I had 6 modelers for about a month and a half. And, you know, that sort of stuff, there's just, people got to get paid, right? So that's why it turns into, it's hard if you're just like a new filmmaker, how to get that stuff produced. Especially some of this stuff, it's the equivalent of making a 2-minute VFX shot. You know, it's just, it adds up. Yeah.
Can you talk about like general ballparks on like budget range? So
Sure.
just kind of where it starts and where it ends.
Yeah. Well, it's always hard, and I'm still figuring it out. I can say I just did a 360, and it was a little over 200 grand, and I spent pretty much all of it. I didn't really get to keep much at all. So if I were to do that again, I might try to get a little more budget. This Insidious project was a passion project for me. So I basically spent every dime making this one as well. I got a budget of 85 on it. And, you know, I spent a lot on camera. I hired an actress. I had sets. I built the whole light rig, which I haven't had a chance to show, that allowed us to move the light around her after we shot live action footage. But yeah, I mean, heavy WebGL stuff, it's really hard to do much of anything under 100 as a studio. If you're going straight freelancers, you're running your own thing and you're producing it out, I think you can go to freelancers and you can get a good 3JS dev and maybe spend 15 grand on that dev, and, you know, then a good designer and another 5, 10 or whatever. Like, but yeah. Yes. Okay, so that's a loaded question. First of all, did I use a framework such as 3JS or something else? Yes, I did use 3JS for almost all these projects. I have coded my own WebGL framework that I sort of did while I was learning WebGL. I think it's very, very helpful if you're going to be a WebGL developer to learn what's going on behind the scenes and know how to actually take it further, because I mean, it's an amazing framework, and Mr. Doob has put in like a million little things. I actually think it probably does more than it should do. You know, you really can't use it to the full extent unless you know how to get into the hood and change things. And very often, projects like this, there's cracks on the walls that required me really getting under the hood of how the rendering engine worked to get our cracks to render correctly. And so I had to modify the renderer to get in there. So I like to use 3JS, but I modify it heavily. And the second part of that question was, if you aren't a WebGL developer, how would you go about collaborating? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think if you're an art director and you want to work on WebGL in general, I think it helps to at least understand what WebGL can and can't do, in addition, understanding the tools. So one thing that I didn't get a chance to talk to in the tech is that I think that there is a lot of opportunity to take advantage of current tool sets out there, Houdini for physics simulations, all the light baking stuff that I was talking about. A lot of the visuals can be achieved and pre-figured out in other pipelines. Most of my animation is done directly in Maya now, and we just have a pipeline for exporting out the basic keyframes and playing that back. So if you are able to sort of take that side and you have a good developer who is able to take the tech side and make a nice pipeline, that's a good way to collaborate, because you can try to stay in the creative programs as much as possible, but yet still be affecting that final. Because in an ideal world, you're not just going like, hey man, can you make me a spinning globe? And then the guy just makes a spinning globe. So, yeah, I think that's it. I think we're out of time. So, thank you guys. Yeah.